أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another one of our Mizan live sessions. Inshallah everyone is doing well, and hopefully you guys have had a good week since last Tuesday that we were together. So as you know, we'll be continuing inshallah with the rulings that have to do with salat. These are of course rulings that are a little less known for people, a little less understood. So we're focusing mostly on those rulings that people may not pay too much attention to or enough attention to. As always, feel free to leave comments below. Let us know inshallah how we're doing. Let us know inshallah any questions or comments that you might have. Feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and inshallah we will get back to you as soon as possible. If you have a question regarding the stuff that we're discussing after the session is over, after we're not live anymore, then please do leave the comments in that don't leave the comments in the comment section or the questions in the comment section, but you can actually take those and you could add those to send us a direct message on Facebook or inbox Mizan Institute, and inshallah we can take it from there. If you do ask a question, please remember to mention who you follow, inshallah. And finally, last but not least, if you have a piece of paper and a pen or a notebook or anything like that at your disposal, make sure to take notes because it will make your life a lot easier moving forward. So alhamdulillah, as you can see, we're getting a little bit more professional equipment going. Hopefully we are going to be taking the audio from these sessions, and we will have proper audio quality to inshallah turn these also into podcasts, so that those who are interested can listen to them maybe while you're driving, maybe while someone else is driving, you're in the car, you can just sit down and listen. And I think that will be a really convenient way for our brothers and sisters to benefit, inshallah. So as always, I'm going to go through a quick review of what we discussed in the previous session, and from there, inshallah, we will move on. Before I continue, let me just fix okay, I think that's a little bit better. All right, so quick review of what we discussed up until now. We were discussing the rulings that have to do with the clothing that someone wears when they are praying. We said that the body has to be covered during namaz, of course, and doesn't matter if anyone's there, not there, whether it's dark, it's not. That is part of namaz. We said that there is a slight difference between the clothing that someone has to wear when they are in front of non-mahram and when they are not in the presence of non-mahram, right? So, of course, with men, there might not be too much of a difference there, but with sisters, there's definitely a difference there. So, for example, the feet, they don't have to be covered in namaz, whereas in front of non-mahram, Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei do believe that they do have to be covered. Ornaments and makeup and things of that nature are allowed in namaz, but they're not allowed in the presence of a non-mahram, in the sense that it would be haram. It wouldn't not makeup in particular, would not make the salat batil or invalid, but it would be considered a sin according to Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei. Covering, hijab itself, that if someone does not have that, then that will create an issue with regards to their salat. And that's why we had a discussion. Another one of the rulings we covered was this, that what if someone didn't cover up and they've been praying their salat for 10-15 years and they haven't been covering up? Do they have to redo those prayers or not? We said according to Ayatollah Khamenei, Ayatollah Sistani, he says that if she knew she was supposed to cover up, or she knew she was supposed to learn about these rulings and she didn't on purpose, then she is muqassir, there's taqsir, and because of that, yes, he says according to ihtiyat wajib, she would have to make up for those prayers. Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling, I honestly couldn't find Ayatollah Khamenei's on that ruling, his ruling on that issue, so I'm not sure honestly what his ruling would be on that issue. Okay, So we moved on for that. We said young girls who are praying who have not reached the age of bulugh yet, they have to cover their body, but the head and the hair and the neck does not need to be covered. And that might be a good way of encouraging our younger, our daughters or our sisters, younger sisters, to start their namaz before they become baligh. At least we can remove this part of it from them. Or maybe if they're really close to the age of bulugh, then maybe this should actually be introduced. But anyways, the ruling is that it's not necessary and it's not a requirement, of course. If someone finds out that a part of their body is showing that's not supposed to be showing in salat, then we said that that's not a problem. If it's just happens by accident, that's not a problem. What they would need to do is they just have to fix it in the middle of their prayer, and then they can continue with their salat. So that's not going to create a problem. I mentioned this last week, that question has been mentioned over and over and over again. When you look at the istifta'at of Ayatollah Khamenei, look at the istifta'at of Ayatollah Sistani, a question comes up over and over again, and they mention over and over again that no, it doesn't create a problem with your salat. You just have to fix it whenever you do realize that the clothing may not be properly done. All right. So that was the idea of clothing and what parts need to be covered. Now we're going to move on a little bit to the parts the conditions that we have for the clothing. Let me just take a look real quick at the comment section, see how we are doing. See, assalamu alaikum to all of the brothers and sisters who have joined us. Very, very nice to have you guys with us from different cities, alhamdulillah. Some from Canada. So let me go into the conditions. We started covering these conditions a little bit before in the last session, so I'm just going to review what we covered up until now, and then we'll start with the new discussion. And today's discussion is an important one. It's one that we all deal with, and I'd say maybe like 90% of people don't know how to deal with these situations that we're going to be covering today. So these are very important, and they really make life a lot easier if you know what to do in those situations. You won't be stuck in those situations anymore. So we mentioned that the conditions of clothing there's 6 of them roughly. 2 of them have to do with men only, and then the other 4 are regardless of whether it's a man or a woman. So quickly, the first one was that it has to be tahir, but there's details to that. There are situations where your clothing does not necessarily have to be tahir. We'll talk about that. And when we say clothing has to be tahir, you're going to include the body in that as well. So your body also has to be tahir. Number 2 is that it has to be mubah. You can't steal someone's clothing and then go pray and act religious and spiritual. Doesn't work with God. It cannot be from maita. It cannot be from an animal that wasn't slaughtered properly. We'll get to a discussion with that. What if I'm wearing something like a leather coat or a leather belt or things of that nature that come from an animal that I'm not sure whether it was slaughtered correctly or not? What am I supposed to do in that situation? That's a very common question. Or like shoes technically wouldn't happen because you'd have to take off your shoes for sajda. But other examples like that do come up. And that's the third one. And the fourth one is that it cannot be from the different parts of the body of a predator or any animal with haram meat. Okay, so those are the 4 conditions that go regardless of gender. And then the men have 2 more conditions that we don't really deal with that much. Clothing should not be of pure silk, and it can't have gold in it. We'll discuss those in the future just very quickly. But those aren't things that we really deal with very often. Okay, so we were discussing taharat. That's what we were discussing, and we mentioned 3 or 4 really important rulings. And these are rulings that we deal with very often. First question, or the first point that I do have to mention here, is this: if someone gets their clothing or their body najis, right? And this najasat leads to a part of their body that they are doing wudu on. If it leads to that part being najis, that means their wudu has now become batil, and therefore their salat is completely batil as well. Okay, so I want to emphasize this because we're going to come to some other different situations where we say, okay, in this case you didn't know, it's okay. Like for example, we'll mention that if someone found out after they prayed that their clothing was najis, it's okay. If you had no idea and then after namaz you found out, oh, it was najis, you don't have to worry about that. But this is all if, all of these situations that we'll mention in just a second, these are all if it did not affect your wudu. If it affected your wudu, that's it. Once wudu goes, wudu is the boss. Once wudu goes, that's it. Our salat has gone as well. Okay? So that's one thing to remember. If I get my clothing najis and then that hits my hand and I know that my hand is najis and then I do wudu on that, my wudu is batil. Doesn't matter when I found out, none of that matters. Because my wudu is batil, that's it. I have to redo my namaz. I have to redo my wudu and I have to redo my namaz as well. So knowing that point, now let's go to these 3 or 4 different situations that we deal with. Situation number 1. I had no idea my clothing was najis. Everything was fine, Shaykh, right? And I prayed, and then after I prayed, I found out, oops, my clothing was najis. What am I supposed to do in that situation? We mentioned last week that according to Ayat al-Sistani and Ayat al-Khamenei, this is not a problem. If you had no idea and this happened all of a sudden, right? So that's not going to create a problem with your salat. That's done. Very simple and very clear. Moving on to the second situation. If I had a doubt about najasat and then I prayed, we said, Ayat al-Sistani says that in this situation, if you have a doubt, you don't have to do anything for it, right? You don't have to necessarily check, but if you don't check and then afterwards you find out that it was najis, right, then you do have to make up for it, right? He says, however, if you do check and you don't find anything and then later on you find out something, that's fine. You don't have to redo it. Okay. Moving on from that, we said the fourth situation. What should I do if I find najasat in the middle of my prayer? It's another situation that we're dealing with, right? I'm praying my salat and then all of a sudden in the middle of my salat, I find that something is there. Ayat al-Sistani said, think if there is a chance that this najasat happened in the middle of your salat, then what you need to do is you have to get rid of it right there in the middle of your salat. You say, but I can't because my hand is najis, there's no way I can wash it in the middle of my salat. Okay, then you would have to redo it. But if there is a chance you can get rid of that najasat in the middle of your salat. You see your clothing is najis, it's possible for you to stop in the middle of your salat for a second, take off your coat for example, right? And throw it aside and then you continue. However, if you're sure that this najasat started from when? It started from before I even started my prayer. And I gave examples of this in the previous session, right? I was playing soccer. I felt like my foot was hurting really bad. I didn't look at it. Now I see that it's bleeding. I know that that bleeding is coming from 2 hours before I started my prayer. In that case, then, he says you do have to redo it. Okay? Moving on to the last ruling, and this is the last ruling of our review, of course, and that is this. What should I do if I knew that my clothing was najis, but I forgot, right? And I forgot and then I prayed. What am I supposed to do? Ayat al-Khamenei's ruling on this situation is a lot easier. He says, listen, if you forgot, that you have to redo it. It's batil. Ayat al-Sistani says it depends. Did you forget because you didn't care in the sense that you were like, yeah, my hand is najis, but I'm not even going to wash it or whatever, like you were careless about it? Or no, you were telling yourself, no, I'm going to wash this, I should wash this, and then you forgot. He said if it was the second one where you were really trying to actually follow up and like you're like, okay, let's say you set an alarm before your namaz, you're like, okay, make sure to wash clothes, right? That's how we set alarms nowadays, right? If you did that and then you prayed, then he says that that namaz is going to be fine. But if you did ihmal, is what he calls it, where you're just careless or whatever, and then you forgot, then you would have to make up for that prayer. Okay, so I know I went through these very quickly. That's because this is all a review. We discussed all of these in the previous session. So if anyone wants to listen to them in a more, slower, at a slower pace, basically, inshallah, if you can go to the previous recording, I've discussed all of this in the previous recording at a slower pace, basically. All right. Let's take a look real quick just to see. Assalamu alaikum to everyone else who's joined us. Thank you very much for being with us. If you guys have questions regarding these 4 or 5 rulings that I just mentioned, you can send them in and we can take them as we go. And you can also let us know how we're doing, inshallah. That will also help us, or if there's any particular suggestions that anyone has, feel free to mention those as well. For those who have just joined, as you see, we have more professional equipment. I mentioned this at the beginning. I'll be mentioning it over and over again for those who are joining us as we go, that hopefully we'll be turning these Facebook Live sessions into podcasts so that anyone who's interested, anyone who finds it beneficial, they can listen to the podcast as they're moving forward. And because of that, we needed proper equipment to have better sound quality. So inshallah, we're moving in that direction. Okay. So we do have a question. Sister is asking, what is the amount? Sister Sharmeen is asking, what is the amount of blood that makes your clothes najis? Very good question. What is that amount that you would say it would make your clothes najis, or regarding blood in particular? So very good question, sister. That will lead us into the discussion that I'm going to discuss right now. So I'll answer your question as we go ahead. Trust me, when I say I'll answer your question, it's going to come up. It's actually going to come up. Some instructors, they say, we'll get to that inshallah. And then you wait for 45 minutes and nothing happens. So, but when I say I'm getting to it, trust me, I'll get to it. Here, it's actually number 1 on our list. So let me start discussing that from right here. Okay, so we said that your clothing has to be tahir. We said that when we're talking about your clothing, you have to add in your body as well. Body has to be tahir, and the clothing has to be tahir as well. Okay, now the question is, what are those situations where you can pray with the body or a clothing that is najis? Depending on who you follow, there are 4 or 5 different situations where you are allowed to pray with your body being najis or with your clothing being najis. And that's what we want to go through today. And each one of them has some detailed points that we have to discuss. Okay, so let's start from here. And this would be the answer to Sister Sharmeen's question. Number 1, the first situation where you can pray, even though your body and your clothing is najis, is if the najasat is blood, number 1. And number 2, it is less than the size of a dirham. A dirham is a coin that they used to use back in the day. So a little bit of explanation here. So first of all, I don't have a dirham in my house. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have a dirham in my house. So the maraji say that, well, you guys don't have dirhams in your house. I don't know if they would have it in their house or not. But they say what you're basically supposed to go based off of is from the last knuckle of your index finger upwards, right? So this part of your finger, you guys can see it. That amount of blood, basically, right? They call it aqdus sababa. They say that amount of blood, if it's on your body or your clothing, it is not going to create a problem for your salat. So that would answer Sister Sharmeen's question. Now, just to clarify again, number 1, this cannot be, there's a number of pointers here. Number 1, this cannot be on the parts that you're going to do wudu on. If it's going to be on the parts that you're going to be doing wudu on, it is going to make your wudu batil, and thus your namaz is going to be batil. Hopefully that's clear up until now. First point. Second point, like we said, it should not be more than the size of the dirham, and we said what measurement you could use for that, right? The tip of your index finger, basically. That's number 2. Number 3, and this is very important, is that if that blood, if it mixes with another liquid, whether it's water, milk, orange juice, I don't know, whatever. If it mixes with that, or it mixes with, the pus that gathers in a wound sometimes, right? The yellow substance that helps with healing that, then this doesn't apply to it anymore. So this blood is just if it's blood, and it's blood basically only blood, and no liquid is mixing with it, nothing else is mixing with it, then that amount is going to be allowed. Okay. Another point that I do have to mention here is that this blood that we're talking about, it does not include situations where the blood is from hayd or nifas or from istihada. Those 3 situations, this exception does not cover those 3 situations. So if the blood that we're seeing is one of those, then even 1 drop of it will make our salat batil. So this is number 1 of situations where you can pray even though your body is najis or your clothing is going to be najis, with all of these details that I mentioned. 2 questions that comes up here, and I'm going to cover them quickly and we will move forward. And feel free to send in your questions if you have questions about this. Hopefully we can answer them here before we move on. Number 1, if you're not sure if the amount is less or more than a dirham, Ayatul Khamni and Ayatul Sistani, both of them say that it's okay and you can pray with that. Okay, that's one ruling that you have to pay attention to, or that we have to pay attention to. Second ruling that we have to pay attention to is that if the blood starts spreading around, right? There's a little bit of blood, there's 1 drop of blood. You look at it, it's 1 drop of blood. It's less than a dirham. And then you hold your hand up like this and it starts spreading. If it starts spreading, then you also have to count that. If it happens to touch your clothing, right? Like it's on your hand and then it touches your clothing, then you have to count both of them. And both of them have to be less than that amount that we mentioned. Okay? So if there is any questions regarding that, feel free to send them in now, because I know that this is a pretty detailed discussion, and I want to make sure that we answer the questions right here. Yes, perfect. So Brother Muhammad Abbas is asking, can you go over the blood mixed with body fluid again? So basically, we said that blood, if it's a certain amount, it's okay for you to have it on while you are praying. The ruling we mentioned, the pointer that we mentioned about that, is that if that blood gets mixed with water, let's say you pour a little bit of water on it, or it gets mixed with pus. Again, pus is that yellow substance that comes out of the wounds to cover it a little bit so that it starts healing, right? If that is the case, then this ruling does not apply. So in that case, you would have to wash it off completely. Okay. Now, you might say, oh, well, what if it's a big cut? Very good question. That's going to be the second point that we're going to cover in just a second. Okay, so big cuts, we will get to that in just a second. But if anyone has any questions about this idea of the blood being the size of a dirham, which, by the way, we mentioned that it's the size of the tip of your index finger, right, from the knuckle upwards, send that in, inshallah, so we can cover it right now before we move on. Or maybe, hopefully, it's pretty clear, inshallah. There are no misunderstandings. Okay. Another question from that we have, Sister Hiba is asking, if there is blood size of a pimple on the face but not bleeding profusely, can we do wudu on that and pray? No, because we mentioned the answer to that is no, because if it's on your face, you're going to do wudu on it, then that part of your face, that basically your face when you are doing wudu, your wudu is going to be batil. So we mentioned this at the point at the beginning, and it's very good that you asked this, so we're going to go over it again. All of these rulings that we're mentioning, it's okay to do this, it's okay to do that, is all about situations when your salah, when your wudu is not going to be done on najis, on a najis face or a najis arm or anything like that, right? If it happens on a najis face, for example, your wudu is batil, and that's it. All these exceptions that we're talking about are talking about other situations. So either you did your wudu already and then your face has a little bit of blood on it, that's okay, right? If it's less than a dirham and it's not mixed with pus or anything like that, that's okay. Or it's not even on a part of your body that would be included in your wudu. So let's say it's on your shin, for example, right? Although I've seen some people when they're doing wudu, they do wudu all the way up to when they're doing the mess of the foot. You guys think I'm kidding, but unfortunately I'm not kidding when I say this. I mean, they don't go up until the shin, but like I've seen people, or like when they're doing mess of the head, they go all the way, which is fine. It's just not required in Islam. Okay. Brother Vasi is asking, Salam Shaykh wa alaikum assalam. While in salat, if I scratch an injury and it bleeds, does this invalidate my salat? Very good question. So this ruling would apply in this situation. If I am in my salat and I scratch my hand and it starts bleeding, if the blood is not the size of more than a dirham, you can continue praying. If it becomes more than the size of a dirham, yes, you would have to stop your prayer and you would have to redo it. Right? So that's the answer to that question. Very good questions, alhamdulillah. Okay, so I'm going to move on to situation number 2. The second situation, let me just pull up my notes here. Second situation where you can pray when your body or your clothing is najis, is when you have a cut. And we're not talking about small cuts now, we're talking about bigger cuts, right? When you have a cut or what they call a boil or an abscess, right? And these are and these things are, like these cuts or these boils are major ones in such a way that they might be bleeding continuously in such a way where you can't wash them, right? If they're small and you can wash them, you absolutely have to wash them. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about situations where the blood is continuous. So it's like a bigger cut, right? If it's a bigger cut and it's the way that it's continuing and I can't wash it, this is another one of those exceptions where you can pray with that. And in this regard, if it's mixed with pus, it's okay, right? If you add medicine onto it, it's okay. This would really help for those who are in the medical field. I mean, I guess you'd have to be a Shaykh in the medical field to deal with something like this. But anyways, like if you have a cut and this cut is continuously bleeding, right, and you can't wash it, right, because it's a bigger cut and you have to allow it to heal. Ayatollah Sistani says that you can allow that, right? And for this one, like I said, it would cover if you would have to do medicine on it or anything you would have to do with it would be completely fine. Regarding your clothing, you do have to change your clothing, obviously, because you can change your clothing. It's just the cut or the wound that you have on your hands, right? So that's one point that we do have to we have to mention here or not regarding this ruling. Okay, so that's it. That's that ruling. Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani have a very slight difference of opinion here. I'll explain it very quickly. So Ayatollah Sistani says that if you have a cut like this and it's continuously bleeding and it won't stop, he says technically you don't have to wash it, even if you are, even if it's not difficult for everybody. Okay, whereas Ayatollah Khamenei says no, it has to be difficult for most people for this ruling to apply to you. And there's a very slight difference of opinion there, and honestly, I don't think it makes a big difference with regards to what we're discussing here. For those who are familiar with the terminology, Ayatollah Khamenei says mashaqqa naw'iyya, it has to have mashaqqa naw'iyya. Ayatollah Sistani does not have this. Ayatollah Sistani's ruling is slightly easier. But like I said, it wouldn't really make that much of a difference, honestly. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there. Now, the important question is this, brothers and sisters. In situations where I want to do wudu when I have a big cut, what am I supposed to do in that situation? So this ruling that I'm about to mention, Assalamu alaikum, Sister Azra, very nice to have you with us. This ruling that I'm about to mention, I could easily say that, 95% of our brothers and sisters might not know this. And so this one is a really important ruling, okay? 90% of the time when someone has a cut, and this is a type of cut that they cannot wash because it's a big cut and it's healing and whatever the case may be, right? People think that they're not supposed to do wudu anymore, they are supposed to do tayammum. I'm gonna pause there for a couple seconds just to get everyone's attention. Again, when you have a big cut, people think you're not supposed to do wudu, you're supposed to do tayammum. Okay. So what, Shaykh? You're saying you're supposed to do wudu like on all of that blood? No, not technically. So pay attention here because there's some details here. And if we understand this, it'll help us a lot. So when you have a wound like this, you have a big cut and you want to do your salat with it, right? Of course, God is not going to ask you to wash it because it's difficult, right? In some cases, it might be painful. In some cases, if you wash it, it won't heal, right? You have to allow it to dry up sometimes for it to heal, for example, right? So what are you supposed to do in these situations? In these situations, Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei have this concept called, and most of our maraji have this concept called wudu jabira. What does that mean? That means that you do wudu the normal way. When it comes to that part that has a big cut or wound on it, and let's just say in my case it's right here on my arm, on that part you're going to take a piece of cloth that is tahir, you're going to put it on there, and then you're going to wipe on that piece of clothing or cloth. And that is going to be your wudu. You are not supposed to be doing tayammum when you have a big wound and a big cut, and you are not able to wash that cut or that wound because washing it is going to harm it, or it's not going to heal, or situations of that nature. Yes, if it's a situation where the cut, you can pour water on it, Ayatollah Sistani says you're supposed to do this. You hold it under tap water for a second, let the tap water run on it. For just 1 second, you push on it for 1 second so that the bleeding stops for 1 second, and that's it. And you say, oh, but it's going to continue bleeding after that. That's fine. You don't have to worry about that, and you do the rest of your wudu in the normal way. So let me know if that's clear. If not, I can explain it again, because that ruling is a very important ruling, and that's one that most people do not pay attention to. And a lot of times it makes your salat batil, because you can mess with a lot of things in salat, but you can't mess with skipping wudu and doing tayammum when you're actually supposed to do an alternative to the wudu that you were supposed to be doing. So if anyone has questions, or you guys feel like I need to explain that one more time, let us know in the comments section, and we can do exactly that. Okay, so I'm going to move on. If you guys have any questions regarding that, you'll let me know as we move on. So the second situation where you can pray with a body that is najis or clothing that's najis is, well, this wouldn't apply to clothing, forgive me, only with the body, is when you have a big cut or a big wound, and this big wound or big cut is continuously bleeding, right? In those situations, and we explained some details there. So that's the ruling with that. And this is regarding your namaz. For your wudu, you would have to do wudu jabira. Yes, Sister Ezra is asking a very good question. What about a cast on a fractured arm? Very good. So that's not directly related to what we're discussing, but it is related to the wudu jabira that we were mentioning. So that's a very good question. Yes, if you have a cast, right? And technically pouring water on your arm when you have a cast is not going to harm your arm, but you can't take your cast off, right? So in that situation also, you would do wudu jabira. Very good question, Sister Ezra. So like someone has broken, let's say they broke their wrist, right? And nowadays, I don't know how doctors do things. If you break your wrist, they do a cast like from here all the way till your neck, basically. So what you do is then if you can wipe the cast instead, that would be your jabira, and that would be fine. If not, you would put a piece of cloth on it, and you would wipe on the cloth, and that would be your wudu for that part. And of course, the rest of your parts of your body, you would do a normal, just your normal wudu. Okay, so inshallah, when we get down to discussing wudu, we'll get more into wudu jabira. It's a very, detailed discussion, but I just wanted to put that out there because it's related to what we're discussing. So, number one, blood that's less than a dirham. There are some details there. Watch that if you're just joining us right now. Number two, situations where you have big cuts and big wounds. Okay. Third situation where you can pray with a body or clothing that is najis, is this number three. When a piece of your clothing is najis, that by itself someone would not be able to cover their awrah with that najis piece of clothing, right? So what does that mean? Very, very small items. For example, someone's socks, someone's hat, someone's belt, a ring that you are wearing, right? For sisters, jewelry that they're wearing. If these are najis, it is not going to create a problem in your salat. Yes, if the najasat, let's say your body is wet and then your body becomes najis because of those things, yes, that's a problem. But if those things themselves are najis, it's not going to be a problem because it's a small piece of clothing that you will not be able to use to cover up. Yes, if your shirt is najis, that's a different thing because you use your shirt to cover up, right? If your pants, right, or forgive me, even for men, underwear, right, those are najis, that's a different thing, right? That would create a problem because you can pray with those things. But smaller items, if you're wearing those things, that's not going to create a problem if they are najis. Number 4, moving on to number 4, the things that you have in your pocket, which kind of technically you may not be considered wearing, right? Because you just have it with you in your pockets, right? Like what things? Like your keychain, your phone. This is really important. I had this question before, people saying, oh, my phone is najis, I can't wash it. What are you supposed to do in that situation? Well, maybe you switch from an iPhone to a Samsung because Samsungs are waterproof. But anyways, this is not sponsored by Samsung, by the way. But anyways, phone, a watch, if I have a tissue paper in my pocket and that tissue paper is najis, these things. Again, this is another situation where it is okay for you to have those things. Now, this is Ayatollah Sistani's ruling. Ayatollah Khamenei ruling, basically he says this is the same as number 3. So if you cannot use it to cover the private parts, then this ruling would apply. Okay. That's number 4. Now, so they say that it can be najis. Now, when we say that these things that you put in your pocket can be najis, we are not talking about situations where they're from meita. We're not talking about situations when they are from the skin of, let's say, an animal that is najis. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about right now, although there are some tiny exceptions there, but I don't want to get into that. It's going to get too detailed. What we're talking about right now is situations where that thing has become najis. So like your phone became najis because of blood, not because it was made of the skin of some haram animal, although in those situations there are some exceptions there. But like I mentioned, I don't want to go into that because it's going to get very detailed there as well. And number 5, the last situation where someone can pray with clothing or a body that is najis is situations where washing the body or the clothing is just too difficult, right? It might be too painful, it might be something like that, right? So then that way, in that case, they are allowed to pray in that way. Okay, I have 2 more rulings to cover here, but before I go through those, I want to see if we have any questions left from what we discovered, because I'm almost done. If anyone has any questions, you guys can send them in, and we can answer them as we are going on. Okay, great. Assalamu alaikum to everyone else who has joined us. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Hussein. Nice to have you with us. So Sister Zahra is asking, if your child touches you who has a cut on his hand that is bleeding while you are praying, what is the ruling in that case? Is your namaz and wudu batil? From what I know, again, that would not be a problem. Yeah, so as far as I know, that would not be a problem. Yeah, inshallah, I'll double check just to make sure, and if I was wrong on that, I'll let you guys know in the next session as well. But from what I remember reading, that's not a problem. If the blood comes from other sources, like it's not our blood or not a human's blood, there are some details there where sometimes they do allow it, and sometimes they do not allow it. Yeah, so let me just read off the ruling real quick here. It says الثاني الدم في البدن واللباس إذا كانت سعته أقل من الدرهم أو أقل من الدرهم ويستثنى من ذلك الدم الحيض ويلحق به على الأحوط لزوما دم نجس العين والميتة والسباع بل مطلق غير مأكول اللحم ودم النفاس والاستحاضة فلا يعفى عن قليلها أيضا ولا يلحق المتنجس بالدم به في الحكم المذكور. So from what I know, that would not create a problem. Sister, if it's less than a dirham, if it is more than a dirham, then yes, it would create a problem. Thank you for your question. Sister Shazia is asking, Salam wa alaikum assalam. What about the blood of zabiha animals we can get on our clothes while washing and cooking that meat? So if you're talking about the blood that we're dealing with in the kitchen, that blood is not najis, because that blood, the blood that remains in the animal after it's slaughtered properly, and they have certain details there that you have to allow all the blood to leave and stuff, not all of it, but the amount that normally leaves the body of the animal, the rest of it is not najis, so that would not apply. Yes, we can have a discussion about situations where there is blood and the blood is from, like maybe if someone was slaughtering an animal in front of you, right? And then it's spilled on you. In that case, from what I know, if it's less than a dirham, it would be okay. If not, then it would be a problem. But I mean, that's something we don't deal with here, really. Brother Muhammad Ali is asking, Salam Shaykh wa alaikum assalam. So you cannot pray with a najis wallet in your pocket. Technically, from what I've understood from Ayatollah Khomeini's ruling, which is Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling on this issue, no. Ayatollah Sistani, however, he technically does allow that. So let me just read. If that wallet is made of something that was not slaughtered properly, technically he does allow it. So let me read off of the ruling to make sure I'm not making a mistake here. Right? He says, Al-Rabi'. This is page 139 if anyone has Minhaj al-Salihin with them. Al-Mahmul al-Mutanajjis فَإِنَّهُ مَعْفُوٌ عَنْهُ حَتَّى فِيمَا كَانَ مِمَّا تَتِمُّ فِيهِ الصَّلَاةِ. And then he continues, ruling 451, يُعْفَى عَنِ الْمَحْمُولِ الْمُتَنَجِّسِ وَإِنْ كَانَ مُتَّخَذًا مِمَّا تَحُلُّهُ الْحَيَاةِ مِنْ أَجْزَاءِ الْمِيتَةِ. So if the wallet is made of cow leather, right? Technically Ayatollah Sistani allows it. From what I know from Ayatollah Khamenei, no. He would not allow that from what I remember. Okay. Let's see here. Brother Hadi is asking, Salam Shaykhna wa alaikum assalam. Just so we're clear, even before I start praying and had blood on my body or clothes and I know about it, I can still pray if it's less than a dirham. Uktat as-sababa. Okay. I'm not sure what they're referring to over there. But yes, you can do that. Again, that's if it's not going to be in a part of your wudu. So if it's not in the part of your wudu, yes, you can pray with that blood, even though you can see it very clearly. That's not a problem. Okay. Brother Muhammad Ali is asking, what if there is shak, whether it is najis or not najis? So Brother Muhammad Ali, if it's okay, we'll leave that when we get to the rulings that have to do when we come to a discussion. So technically, if you don't know if something is najis or not, it is tahir. But if your question is, I don't know if it was slaughtered properly or not, these are two different questions, then the ruling is going to be slightly different over there. And we'll get to that inshallah next session when we discuss the rest of the rulings. Because the rest of the rulings we discussed is that the clothing and the things that you're wearing and things of that nature, they cannot be from the different parts of Mayta. So that we'll discuss in the next session. There you go. You have you definitely have an excuse to be here for the next session as well. Okay. There's one more ruling that I want to cover before we end, inshallah. Okay, yeah, so this ruling, can you pray with clothing that has become najis with the urine of a baby that is still breastfeeding? This is one of those rulings that I had heard over and over again, people were saying, oh no, this is allowed, or some people saying, no, it's not allowed. And it's one of those rulings that it's not very clear, so we want to clarify that. That's why I want to make sure I'm going to read off of the book itself to make sure that we get this one right. And just to clarify it. So the question is, and we have some ahadith about this as well, that in certain situations when a person who is dealing with a child, in particular, they've mentioned, like for example, a child who's still breastfeeding, for example, right? And this child, this person gets a urine of the child on their clothing. Are they allowed to pray with that, right? So, slight difference of opinion here between Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani. Okay, so I'll mention what Ayatollah Sistani says first. Ayatollah Sistani says, first of all, if this person, basically Ayatollah Sistani says, listen, this ruling is not a ruling in and of itself. That hadith, basically his understanding is that hadith was talking about a situation where this person who was dealing with this child, it was too difficult for her or for him to be able to change their clothing. Like it was just way too difficult. And because of that, this is allowed. So in the sense that if someone is dealing with that situation where it is haraj, it's unbearable difficulty for them to change their clothing, then yes, he says, then they can pray with that clothing that has become najis, with the urine of this child. Okay, and he doesn't say breastfeeding in particular. He just says al-murabbiya li-tifl al-dhakar, a baby boy. That's important to remember. So, but technically that wouldn't apply to our lives today for the most part. Yes, it's difficult, like in general, but it's not unbearable difficult where you say, oh, there's no way I can wash my clothing. No, there is a way to wash your clothing. So technically this wouldn't apply to it. So let me read this. This is page 140 from Minhaj al-Salihin. والمشهور بين الفقهاء رضي الله عنهم رضوان الله تعالى عليهم العفو عن نجاسة ثوب المربية للطفل الذكر إذا كان قد تنجس ببوله. If it's become najis because of his urine, ولم يكن عندها غيره, and she has no other clothing other than this. بشرط غسله في اليوم والليلة مرتان. If she washes it once in the morning and once at night. I'm just going off of these very quickly because what he says is what matters. ولكن المختار, however, the opinion that I have chosen is إناطة العفو فيه أيضا بالحرج الشخصي فلا عفو من دونه. So he's saying technically this hadith was talking about a situation where it was super difficult for her to do anything about it, which we already mentioned, that if something is haraji for you, it brings about unbearable difficulty for you, then you don't have to wash your clothing or your body that has become. So we already mentioned this. So technically he's saying this is nothing new. This is just number 5 that we just covered already, right? Similarly, Ayatollah Khomeini also has, Imam Khomeini, he also has a very, basically a similar ruling. But what we can all agree on between Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei is that they do not say it is not najis. There's a discussion of whether you can pray with that or not. Not whether it's najis. It's definitely najis. Question is, can you pray with it or not? And we mentioned, according to Ayatollah Sistani, technically you can't even pray with it. Ayatollah or Imam Khomeini, in his Tahrir al-Wasila, he has basically a similar ruling. He says, this page 224, volume 1 from Tahrir al-Wasila, الخامس ثوب المربية للطفل أمًا كانت أو غيرها, a lady who's taking care of a child, فإنه معفو عنه إن تنجس ببوله. He says yes, if the clothing becomes najis with the urine of this child, then she doesn't have to change her clothing. But then he adds a bunch of conditions that technically doesn't even apply to us. One of them is that she should not have any other clothing. When was the last time we were dealing with a situation where we didn't have any other clothing, right? So technically this doesn't even apply to us. So to wrap up, number 1, they both agree that it's najis. There's a discussion on whether you can pray with it or not, right? Number 2, even when it comes to praying with it, that's not, as I mentioned, Ayatollah Sistani technically does not allow it. And Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Khomeini have so many detailed conditions that we technically don't even deal with that. One of that is that you shouldn't have any other clothing. We don't deal with that, honestly. And for him, it says, for him, there's some other conditions as well. So technically, if I wanted to wrap up the answer to that question, no. If you get the urine of a baby boy who is young on the clothing, then it would have the same ruling as normal. Okay, so we'll be ending soon, inshallah. If there are any final questions, let us know. Brother Vasi is asking, according to Ayatollah Sistani, is it ihtiyat wajib or fatwa? According to Ayatollah Sistani, this is his fatwa, that you are only allowed to pray with that clothing if it's really, really difficult. Which again, I'm emphasizing that when these guys, when our ulama and maraji speak about haraj, they are talking about very difficult situations. Not in the sense that, oh, it's a little annoying. No, they mean like, it's unbearable difficulty, as we say. So technically we don't deal with it, honestly. So yes. And by the way, yeah, so I'll just leave that at that. All right. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm just going to take a quick look, see if we have anything else that we need to cover here. Yeah, so I'll just cover this last ruling, and again, we have 6-7 minutes. If anyone has any more questions, send them in. If not, then inshallah we'll end after I finish this ruling. The last ruling is, if I have only one piece of clothing and I have to pray with that piece of clothing, but that piece of clothing is najis. Again, something that we don't really deal with that often, but I will mention one particular example where we do deal with it. What am I supposed to do in this situation? Okay, now technically we don't really deal with this very often in today's world. I mean, and usually even when you're traveling or whatever, even if you're traveling, you don't have anything, you have to go buy some clothes, right? And now people are going to go buy clothes and be like, oh, Shaykh told us to go and buy clothes. But anyways, so technically we don't really deal with this. But the situation where we do deal with this is if it's a situation where you don't have time left, right? So you woke up for Fajr, there's 2 minutes left, right? And you don't have time to change, for example. You don't have time to do anything like this. What are you supposed to do in that situation? Ayatollah Sistani says you're supposed to pray with that clothing, whereas Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling, or Ayatollah Khomeini's ruling, is going to be slightly different. If I can just find this ruling real quick. Yes. Is it this one? It's ruling number 7 on page 214. He says, لو انحصر الساتر في النجس فإن لم يقدر على نزعه لبرد أو نحوه صلى فيه إن ضاق الوقت. He says, if you can't take it off, then you can just pray like that. You can just pray with that najis clothing if there isn't enough time. He says, but if you can take it off, which is usually the situation for us, فَالْأَقْوَى إِتْيَانُ الصَّلَاةَ عَارِيًا مَعَ ضَيْقِ الْوَقْتِ. If you're running out of time, then you would have to pray without any clothing on, because your clothing is najis. So slightly different from Ayatollah Sistani's ruling. All right. So we'll answer, inshallah, Brother Arif's question. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. What if your gum bleeds a lot and sometimes it bleeds in middle of salat? Yeah, so if it bleeds in the middle of salat, these conditions that we mentioned, as far as I know, or these exceptions that we mentioned, would not apply in this situation. Why, you ask? Because that blood is now mixed with liquid. And we said the less than dirham and more than dirham and all that stuff comes up when it is not mixed with other liquids. This is mixed with the saliva. As far as I know, that would create a problem with regards to our salat. All right. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters, being with us. Alhamdulillah, I think it was a very, honestly, when I go through these rulings and I'm preparing these, I learn a lot myself as well. Hopefully it was beneficial for the audience as well. Inshallah, we'll end. Tomorrow, inshallah, Shaykh Amin will be with you guys. So he will be covering the topic of the topic of the Shia doctrine, which is basically our belief system in a principle method. He will be covering that, inshallah. And as you know, we've been having courses, different cities, alhamdulillah. Shaykh Amin just got back from Toronto. It was a great experience there from what we had from the feedback and the emails that we got. Alhamdulillah, there was another session held in New York. Again, great feedback there as well. And if anyone is interested in holding a course in their communities, they can reach out to us in the on the Facebook page, Mizan Institute's Facebook page. If you have not already, please do follow and like the Mizan Institute Facebook page. Hopefully, inshallah, we can get the word out to more people, and we can also update you guys whenever we're having more sessions like this. Thank you very much. Take care. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.